Welcome to OpMed TV in collaboration with WarDocs podcast. Today we're joined with retired Lieutenant General James Peake, who was the Surgeon General of Army Medicine as well as the Secretary of the VA. So, Dr. Peake, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Good
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
I'm currently working with a company called CGI. It's a global IT services company in about 40 countries around the world, a global company that does really end-to-end IT services, of which health is one of the industries we serve.
So right now we're at an operational medicine symposium. Why is that important and what brings you here?
I've obviously a long-standing interest in military medicine. And it's always good to understand where military medicine is and where they think they're going and what the technologies are they're considering to be a part of that future journey.
What kind of things have you seen in this meeting or the industry that kind of get you excited about that technology or future?
When you think about it, some of the things that none of this is flip the switch and you got a new thing right there in front of you. Some of this is really improvements on things that we were working in the Army 20 years ago. And now to see it really being applied to a joint force, I think that is one of the changes. The advances in technology, I think, are enabling some of the things that we have talked about for many years. And I think we have a new generation of combat medics, of soldiers in general, that are more digital native and maybe more adaptable to the new technologies. So I'm enthusiastic about the opportunity in front of us.
So you first joined the Army as an infantry officer and were deployed in Vietnam, which is really our last experience with kind of a large-scale combat operations. What lessons did we learn from that time when you were there to what we're preparing for in the next generation, where we're not going to have a counterinsurgency operation, we're going to have a near peer or something else?
I wouldn't say that Vietnam was, I'd rather, you contrast that to Korea or World War II. Vietnam was quite different than that.
Right.
So in terms of these large-scale contingency operations, it clearly was that, but we had air superiority. We had the dust-offs were able to maneuver relatively safely. From an air superiority perspective, they took a lot of ground fire, and it was certainly one of our most hazardous environments.
Right.
But in terms of medical evacuation, I think some of those lessons that we learned in Vietnam in terms of being able to get people quickly back to a place where they had the capability to do extensive care. I mean, I went through to Second Surgeon Chulai, and then from there on down to Nha Trang, to the 8th Field Hospital as an example. But I think some of those are some of the same principles that led to our use of the idea of the golden hour in the last 20 years of the COIN environment. So, I think some of the lessons we keep learning and evolving.
Yeah.
Well, you take your lessons learned. I think we talked about this once before, Doug, that at some point the lesson learned was you shouldn't be using tourniquets because that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And that came out of real world experience. But maybe that was the wrong lesson learned. Yeah. So, I think we need to continue to be thinking and learning and trying things that move the ball forward. And you see some of that here on the display, on the exhibitor floor, new ideas. And I remember when we were just starting up the 91 whiskey program, the 68 whiskey program, the ability to leverage simulation was really important. I still see gaps in what we're doing that I'm looking that I think will be filled by the technologies that I'm seeing here. I think, we keep talking about, they were talking about the mystics this morning. My view is every squad ought to have a mannequin they can pull out and engage in basic skills at every range or every opportunity they take that, they take the squad to the field. So I think it's those kinds of things that need to be built into the sustainment training, as an example, that I think we're getting to the point where that can be done.
Now, I'm sure you're paying attention to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine.
Sure.
And seeing that may be a model of what could happen in the future for future battlefields.
It's one of the contingencies. My point is, I think that is clearly one of the contingencies we need to be prepared for. But it really is about taking what are the capabilities packages and then aligning them to meet the mission at hand. To the variety of environments in which soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are going to be at risk for medical injury and therefore medical care. And then being able to match that scenario with the tools, including the capabilities and the human capabilities as well as the technical capabilities of those capability packages that will ultimately save lives.
What advice would you give to leaders of today who are really leading through change, because technology and innovation is changing so fast? What advice do you give to leaders who don't know exactly what the technology is going to look like in a year?
Well, you need to have the open mind and the processes to keep that those opportunities in front of you, so that you can pick and choose and assemble them into the force at the right time. So it's a matter of maintaining the kind of a sense of innovation and not just being pigeonholed to what the last war was. We did the Army After Next War Games back in, must have been the late 90s, talking about some of these same things. Denied where you don't have air superiority, where you're fighting urban warfare, those kinds of scenarios, to force us to say, okay, what are the technologies that are evolving or that we should cause to be evolved? And I think that's part of the role of the leadership in places that like the AMED Center and School or combat developments and doing that for the joint force.
How soon do you see in the future where we're going to have unmanned vehicles?
We've got them now.
Robotics for medical on the battlefield?
We've been talking about robotics on the I put Rick Satava at DARPA because we were wanting to explore that possibility back then.
Right.
And DARPA, as you know, does the bleeding edge kinds of stuff, and that evolved to the Da Vinci robot. That is yet to be translated into a battlefield capability, but down the road, I'm sure those kinds of things will be at least not pure robotics, but human-assisted robotics, to be able to do things in a better, more standardized, secure environment.
We've been talking with Dr. James Peake, our former Army Surgeon General and Secretary of the VA, on this collaboration between OpMed TV and WarDocs podcast. Dr. Peake, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate your insights.
Good to see you. Thanks.